taught you to be good girls when we're young. What that looks like, being a good girl, what that looks like in school is sitting quietly, not interrupting, colouring in the lines, getting good grades. We'll do well, right? Because we'll get an A. In many ways, we take that good girl conditioning into work. And we just assume that if we do good work, it'll be noticed. That's not how it works at work. And if you still play by those rules, you lose ability to make my work visible. There is visible work and invisible work. And we only get judged on our visible work. And if you sit in the corner...
Hello. Welcome to another knowledge bomb episode of Lead to Greatness, where we believe in helping others reach their greatest potential and together change the world. Today on Lead to Greatness, we have Helen Appleby. If this is your first time joining us, please consider subscribing and hit that notification bell and hit that like button. This will be greatly appreciated in helping getting out this content to great leaders and great individuals like yourself. Helen is a British, New York-based women's leadership expert, author, speaker, and podcaster who has helped hundreds of women to step into their power and write their own rules for success. And also, helping hundreds of men understand how to best support those women. Please help me welcome Helen with Getting the Recognition You Deserve. Cedric Francis, and you are listening to Lead to Greatness.
I'm Helen Appleby. The accent is English, but I'm actually based in New York. And I'm an executive coach and a women's leadership trainer and the author of a book and a podcast and a course, which is all called The Unwritten Rules of Women's Leadership. Yeah. So before doing this, I had my own corporate background. I ran $1 billion business and I've lived and worked in 6 countries before I discovered, honestly, that I liked growing people more than I liked growing brands or businesses. And that really led me to where I am today.
Wow. How did you discover that?
I think, so I had a coach, which was a great experience for me. And I think just looking at what was it in my day that gave me energy? What was it that lit me up? You know, what were the things that I was drawn to do on a day-to-day basis? And what was the stuff that drained me of energy and that I kind of, put off or procrastinated on? And when I looked through those things, I realized that, hiring people, developing them, having the team aligned, having a really healthy work environment was really the bits that I was drawn to. And the interesting thing about that, Cedric, is that when you do that, when you can create that kind of team and when you put effort and energy into doing that, you get better results and people want to work in your team. And it was so, ultimately I found it really, really rewarding. I was giving a lot of effort and energy into spending time with people, giving them feedback, helping them succeed, helping them grow their careers, thinking about what they want to do next. But I actually got so much from it that, it really made my day better too. And, I said I like growing people more than I like growing brands or businesses out loud to a coach. And it was like the genie came out the bottle and then it wouldn't go back in again.
Amazing. Did the coach bring that out of you, or that's something that it just kind of magically happened?
Gosh, I think that having a coach was really helpful. I think doing the work on you as a leader, though, I think you raise a really good point, Cedric. I think, honestly, to be the best leader that you can be, you have to have really great self-awareness.
Yes.
So I'd been through a lot of that work with, reviews with my own line managers where I'd had good managers, where I'd done my own self-development, personal development work. But honestly, the closer your intention and your impact are together, the smaller the gap between your intention and your impact. So the higher your self-awareness, the better leader you can be. So yeah, I've definitely done work on myself on that journey to understand myself.
Awesome. So going from that self-awareness, you're going from self-awareness. So you're aware of what you feel, you're aware of your emotions, you're aware of what you're passionate about. So going from that, what was the transformation, the moment that changed the way you show up and take action in the world?
I think it might be the one I just described, honestly, Cedric. I think getting clear that that was really a passion point for me. Because,
Yeah.
after saying that, I told you the genie was out the bottle, but it wasn't
Yeah.
like I left the next day and did this. That was really the start of a 5-year journey.
Mm.
I had to train as a coach. I got accredited. I had internal coaching clients. It was quite a journey to actually leaving. I was working on the biggest launch that my company had ever worked on. I wanted to, succeed and finish on my terms, if you like. So I think really that was the turning point. And to be honest, even in those 5 years, when I, had all those coaching skills and put all that effort into coaching and developing my team, it just, like I said, people want to work in your team and it just accelerates your results. I just, it made me, having that focus on people and focus on coaching just made me a much better leader.
After that, I mean, I'm pretty sure you're still developing, but going from that journey, that particular journey, what was life before and 5 years later?
I don't know if it was 5 years, Cedric. I would say that if you look at my leadership journey, I was really driven, really results orientated, really ambitious. Many of us go through this, but at the beginning of our careers, we're often rewarded for being individual contributors. So kind of, the way that would sometimes be reflected back is she's really ambitious. She's out for herself. And it's interesting, I coach on this a lot now, but just the way that women are viewed in this whole realm of ambition and determination can often be seen differently if they're a man. So ambition is less well tolerated in women. But, honestly, if you met me in my 20s and early 30s, I was a get shit done machine, really driven and delivering results. And as I said, across a number of a lot of different places in the world. And I think the biggest shift, honestly, was there was a point at which, Cedric, I realized that as a leader, you can only get so far if it's about you. And there's a point at which you have to shift your leadership style to being an individual contributor, from being an individual contributor to succeeding through others. And there's a point at which you realize on your leadership journey, it's not about me anymore. And actually, my job is to be there for my team. So it's kind of servant leadership, which I know is a theme close to your heart. With that, how can I support my team? How can it not be about me? And how can I be there to enable them, to grow them, to, have a mission that inspires us all? Together, on my own, I will only get so far, and together we will get so much further. And it's interesting now, in my coaching with senior leaders, I went through that journey, but still, even if you're a senior leader, or even if you have people reporting to you, it's an interesting question to ask yourself. Is it really about me? Am I still showing up on some level on the inside, right? Is my dirty little secret that actually it's still a bit about me, and that actually I like that feeling of being the hero, being the smartest in the room, being the one who can still solve the problems? Because there's something kind of validating about that, to move through that and to be like, do you know what? I'm not the smartest in the room. I have people here. I've hired people that are smarter than me. And I don't know if I know the answer, but we're going to figure it out together. And it's my job to support those experts. That is a big transition. And so, to answer your question, that was the biggest transition for me, right? I realized that it wasn't about me anymore. It was about the team.
Yeah. Awesome. You mentioned driven. You mentioned driven about 3 times. And I want to ask you this. Why are you so driven to empower women to step into their power and write their own rules?
I think, honestly, Cedric, the roots of it are really young. The roots of it were, my dad telling me that girls can do anything that boys can do. And I believed him, and he's right. I was a fierce competitor. You say I mentioned driven, but, from a young age, I competed. I was very sporty. I had all the jobs. I majored in business. I joined one of the biggest, I worked for actually two of the biggest companies in the UK. But I guess on that journey, I realized it was harder than I thought it was going to be.
Mm.
And it was harder than it should have been. And I really struggled on my journey. I really struggled. I was often the only woman in the room. I struggled with conflict. I took conflict really personally, really struggled to have difficult conversations. And there were more moments than there should have been of me trying to cry silently in the bathroom.
Mm.
I struggled to find mentors and sponsors because the people above me didn't look like me and I didn't get asked and I didn't know how to ask. And then, when it came to having kids, once I had kids, I always felt like I left work too early and got home too late. And, I only lived 10 minutes from home.
Jeez.
So that sense of like, he didn't tell me that stuff. And I guess he didn't know because he was a man.
Mm.
On that journey, I figured it out. I ended up, learning, reading the books, learning from the few women that there were around me and learning from the men around me. And I got very senior. But looking back, I realized, I went on all the courses that those two big companies sent me on. And none of it was really what I needed to learn to navigate as a woman because the rules are different in subtle and very, very important ways. They're different. So I felt like when I got to the end of it, like, wow, I wish this had been written down. I wish I'd learned this earlier. And that was that was the inspiration of like, well, Helen, maybe you should just write it down and then they won't be the unwritten rules anymore because you'll have written them. And I felt that, if there were certain things that if I'd learned them earlier in my career, so how to ask for mentors, how to make my work visible, how to have difficult conversations, if I'd had those skills earlier, it would have been easier. And honestly, Cedric, I want it to be easier. I want it to be easier for the women that are coming behind us and, for all of our daughters.
What you didn't know then that you know now?
One of the biggest things, I think that girls are taught to be good girls when we're young. And I think what that looks like, being a good girl, what that looks like in school is sitting quietly, not interrupting, coloring in the lines, getting good grades. And that at school, we're taught if we get good grades and we keep quiet, then we'll do well, right? Because we'll get an A. And that's enough, right? And that's how you succeed. And I think in many ways, we take that good girl conditioning into work. And we just assume that if we do good work, it'll be noticed. What what it took me too long to find out is that that's not how it works at work. And if you still play by those rules, you lose. You will get passed over. In your 20s, maybe you don't notice it, but in your 30s, suddenly I was looking around and thinking, how did that happen? And I think the piece that I missed was this ability to make my work visible. So the rule that I talk about is there is visible work and invisible work. And we only get judged on our visible work. And if you sit in the corner and do good work and hope it's going to get noticed, it's not, right? It doesn't work like that. So how do you make your work visible? That was a big journey for me. And realizing that was my responsibility to make my work visible, even if it was, to really equip my manager to do it, but actually not to rely on my manager to do it, that I had to do it too. I had to identify, who was going to be in the room or consulted when my next role was discussed and make sure they knew what I was doing, make sure that I was educating them on the work that I did, the value that I brought and the results that I delivered so that they knew.
Wow. That is a knowledge bomb. I want you to do something, Helen. I want you to just kind of give us an example or maybe a story of something that relate for someone that may be in the situation, a woman that's in the situation right now and don't realize that her work is not visible. What do that look like and what can she do about it?
So I think, honestly, Cedric, my experience of this is when I say that to women, they know exactly what I mean. Usually what happens if I say that to a room full of women, they go, oh, yes, that's me. If I left, they'd have to replace me with two people, or they say they have no idea what I do. They know. But then it's the shift is, the resistance for me on the journey was this feeling like, oh, well, they don't know. But that means I have to self-promote now, doesn't it? And that feels icky. That feels inauthentic. It feels like a lot of work. It feels like another thing on my to-do list. And I struggle to make myself do it. And the shift for me, and the question I would say your female listeners should ask themselves is, if self-promotion, the idea of self-promotion feels uncomfortable, can you educate? Can you educate? And once I reframed it as educating, can I teach them about the work that I do? Can I give them an update and ask for advice? Wow. And then, honestly, it occurred to me as possible. I was like, oh yeah, I can do that. I can teach them. I can explain to them. I can educate them, and I can ask for their input and their advice. And then I found it much easier to do and really helpful. Right. And just, I talk about in the book and on the course about really sitting down and thinking, who will be in the room or consulted when my next role is discussed, and making a list of those people. And usually people say, well, it'll be my boss and it'll be HR. And I say, well, are you sure? Is it really just them? Yeah. My guess is that list is between 6 and 10 people long. Is it your boss's boss? Yeah. Is it your HR person's boss? Is it potentially your new boss? Is it your peers? Who else are the other leaders that will have an opinion when you want to be promoted or moved? And if you make that list, how much do they know about the work that you do and the value that you add and the fact that you're looking to move or be promoted? And have you asked for their advice? And I think if you set out really intentionally on that journey, you will learn a lot. Back to our, the great question you asked me at the beginning about self-awareness, you'll learn a lot. And also you will get paid more, promoted, and get the recognition that you deserve. And that's what I want for women.
That is some great advice, great nuggets. And I'm listening. I'm sitting here listening, and as a man, I hear what you're saying. And this is something that as a man that we don't deal with. Men are normally, we typically, it's okay, man, hustle, grind, and, just kind of go like a bulldog, just kind of going at it or whatever. And it's fine. But I've literally seen this, with women in corporate when they try to do that. They get called some other different types of names, and which is sometimes very disrespectful. In cases like that, this whole image on how a man can get away with doing something or being aggressive, but a woman is considered some words that's not even appropriate. And even dealing with that. So I want you to kind of give advice to us men. What can we do? What can we do to help support women in our organization, women on our leadership team, women that we work alongside? What can we do? What's some advice?
Absolutely. Yes. And I would say, to be honest, Cedric, if the men that are listening to this interview have got this far, then probably they're not part of the problem. Right. And there's always things that we can all do better. So I think there's a bunch of questions. There's a number of questions that I would ask your male listeners and you to consider. Okay. And the first of which is, are you a leader, or are you leading an organization or working for an organization that you would want your daughter to work for? And if you don't have a daughter, then, substitute sister, niece, whatever works for you. But are you, or mum, depending on how old you are you working in an organization or leading a team? Are you the kind of leader that you would want them to work for? Yeah. And if not, what are you doing about it? So that's the first question. Are the women in your team and in your organization treated well? Are they set up for success? Are they paid equally for equal work? And then a number of other questions I would ask men to consider. Do you listen to women? And I know every time I ask that, the voice inside every man's head said, of course I do. And then I'll say, okay, let me ask you that again. And let me tell you that men interrupt twice as much as women do in the workplace, the research shows. And you know that 3/4 of the time when men interrupt, they interrupt women. Wow. So are you really listening? Right? When you watch yourself in the next meeting, sit in the next meeting and listen to yourself, watch yourself from outside and say, am I really listening, or am I listening to interrupt? And what's interesting, even for your female listeners, it's worth watching that as a woman as well, because we think, well, that's unconscious bias and, I don't do that. But what the research shows, women definitely interrupt less than men, right? They interrupt half the amount of the time that men do. But when women interrupt, we also interrupt other women more than we interrupt men.
Ask you that.
Right? Damn, hey, ouch,
Yes.
that hurts. So, and then I think, and the other question to ask is, do you hold women to a different standard? And I think this, Cedric, this goes back to the point you made around, the range of emotions that it is acceptable for men to exhibit at work. And what the research shows is practically the only emotion that it's socially acceptable for men to exhibit at work is usually anger.
Yeah.
And actually, that is a very difficult emotion for women to express. So it's difficult for men to cry, and it's difficult for women to express anger. And so if you hold on to that thought for a moment, but say, do you hold women to a different standard? So if you are talking about someone who is very driven, very ambitious, pushy, those kinds of adjectives that get used, would you say that if it was a man? And just ask yourself that question. Would you see this the same way if it was a man? And just ponder that. Because it's interesting, they did some research out of Harvard where they looked at 2 resumes. They showed half the class a resume that was and the name on the top of the resume was Heidi Rosen. And then they showed the other half of the class exactly the same resume, except the name on the top was Howard Rosen. Only one word was changed. Right? Heidi is actually a real person who worked in venture capital. And then they asked half each of the class who'd seen the resumes that they'd seen to rate the person on their likability, their competence, and whether or not they'd like to work for them. Remember, exactly the same resume, only one word had changed. Heidi and Howard were rated the same on competency, and Heidi was rated significantly lower as a nice person and someone that I would like, a likable person, I think the measure was, and someone that I would like to work for. And there was no other difference. So I think really asking yourself the question, would it be different if Joanna or if, Heidi was called Howard? And then the other thing that is really interesting, I think, from the research is when we consider promotions, what the research shows is that more often than not, or often, men and women are promoted on a different basis. So men are often promoted based on their potential, and women are more often not promoted based on their track record. So let's think about a job that we're looking to fill, where the person that gets promoted into this role needs to be able to do A, B, C, D. What the conversation might go like is, well, Howard's done ABC and he's done really well. So he's obviously going to be able to do D. He's crushing it, right? Let's promote Howard. And then when they look at Heidi, the discussion will say, well, Heidi's done ABC, but she hasn't done D. So, not really ready yet. So really thinking through, would you say that if it was a guy? And are you judging some people based on their potential and some people based on their track record? So hopefully some thought-provoking questions rather than direct advice, with some facts and research behind them to help the men, help the women in their organization. And women don't need fixing, but they do need to be treated well and allowed to grow and thrive and treated fairly. The other way of thinking about it is, where I see it often gets confused, is when leaders get confused between confidence and competence. So if men and women, often what I see is men and women are doing equally good jobs, slightly differently, but both doing really great jobs. And men are often just more confident about it, more confident speaking up, more confident, building relationships with senior folks, and confidence and competence get mistaken.
Wow, Helen, this is really Amazing and thought-provoking, because I'm really thinking and I'm listening. I think this is so awesome. Thank you so much for sharing this and really getting us as males to really think deeper into when we're hiring and when we're working alongside or in meetings with women. And thank you so much for that. Something to think about, and those practical questions that we can really ask ourselves. Before we go, what are some tips, tools, advice that you can share with the Lead to Greatness community to help us reach our greatest potential?
I'll leave you with one more, and that is thinking through what is it you want and ask yourself, have I asked for it? Ask for what you want. So many times when I work with leaders or work with women on their leadership journey or talk to people, they say, I wish I could have this. I wish I could do this. I wish they would give me this. I wish I could, this could be different. And I'll say, have you asked? And they'll say, oh, no, that's not possible, blah, blah, blah. It wouldn't. Yeah. And I'm like, but have you asked? So final tip is ask for what you want. The worst that can happen, there's three answers, aren't there? There's three potential answers to a powerful request. There's yes, no, or renegotiate. But if you don't ask, it's a no, isn't it?
Wow. Helen. If someone wanted to connect with you and what you're doing, where should they go?
Yeah, sure. I am Helen Appleby on LinkedIn and Helen Appleby Coaching on Instagram, and helenappleby.coaching.com is the website, and that's got details of the book, the course, and me.
On behalf of the Lead to Greatness community, I want to thank you so very much for taking time out of your busy schedule and adding value to us all.
Thank you, Cedric.
So we want to thank you for joining us today on the Lead to Greatness podcast. And if this is your first time, don't forget to subscribe, hit that like button, hit the notification bell so you won't miss any of these amazing episodes. And if you're on iTunes, go ahead and rate the podcast and leave a review. That helps get the word out to great leaders and entrepreneurs like yourself. So we want to thank you for joining us today. So remember, if you help others reach their greatest potential, together we can change the world. Peace.